Hello, everyone. Welcome to another edition of Tectonic Lounge. Today, our guest is Scott Lenzi. Scott and I have known each other for quite a while, had a chance to work on at least one project together, but I really enjoy picking his brain on things that have to do with marketing and technology. Scott, tell us more about yourself, where you are these days, what your role is.
Sure. Thanks for having me, Serge. So Scott Lenzi, I'm the head of digital marketing for SS&C. My role is really to align our user journeys to help our users get their needs met and move into a pipeline. Before that, we worked together at Veracode, where I was running the digital marketing in that organization. And my background is, if you go further and further back, it's originated in IT. So I have a fairly technical background. But right now I'm running web, paid media, I've run brand and content, and trying to align digital marketing.
So I'll just throw out this little softball question for you. So running all this has gotten easier as the technology evolved, right? There's no more challenges. It's all easy peasy, right?
Yeah, right. It's all automagically. Is that what we say? Right.
Yeah.
Yeah, there's pros and cons.
I mean, I thought AI solves every problem. We just press a button and everything gets done for us.
Right. Well, look, I'm old enough to remember when computers first kicked in and everyone said paper would go away. Right. So, yeah,
I don't want to count how many pieces of paper are here. Yeah.
I mean, technology is definitely an enabler, I think. Personally, I find that if you don't have a strategy or a plan, technology will make something worse. In today's environment, I find that a lot of our solutions or our technology is looked at to solve the problem without a plan. And that's dangerous for me. I think that if you have a strategy and it can be applied, then you can find the technology to meet that strategy.
So it's kind of like a hammer. If you don't have a plan, you are going to smash your fingers at some point.
Exactly. Right? Yeah, I'm big on analogies, you know that. And I used to say, if you walked onto a construction site and there was no home there and it had all the materials from Home Depot, would you use every one? No, you have a plan and you only buy the materials you need and put them in that pile to build the house. Right?
Well, let's talk about, let's say the last 5 years. I know we had a big pivot point with the pandemic, but I think we're that 5-year window, 4-year window maybe. What have you noticed as the trends have changed in the way we use technology as specifically applied to marketing?
Oh, great question. So look, I would say there's a couple of things. I would say that, there's a big focus on tech stacks, right, in marketing and how to leverage these data. I think there's been a great shift in understanding that we need data, but now we need the insights from the data. So that's the first thing I would say. Big data is great, but what do you do with it? How do you wield that hammer, as you said, right? And I think we're finally getting to a point where organizations are understanding what does the data mean is more important than capturing the data and just having a ton of data to report on. So that's number one. Two, I would say we're finally viewing, digital marketing has been great in that everybody understands when the web really kicked in that it's the hub, right? A website, all the different channels that drive to the website or work together. What I've seen in the last couple of years coming out of that has been that we're starting to understand it's a channelless model, that you can't view each of these tech solutions as one channel because the user doesn't see it that way. They see it as a representation of you as a whole versus I think what a lot of companies do. And we almost have a representation of our org chart out there, right? Because different teams are working in silos on different digital channels. And then the third thing I would say is that aligning all of these technologies so they're working in concert, right? For example, you might have an operations team who's working on automation and operations through Marketo and blasting emails. You might have a web team that's building websites. You might have a sales team that has a sales enablement tool. All great technologies that have enabled the users. But now what you want to do is make sure they're all aligned with the strategy. So it's a consistent message, a consistent outreach, consistent campaign, however you want to say it. And I think that's what we're finally getting to with the newer technologies. So that's from a marketing perspective. And then the other thing I would say is just from a technical perspective, the tools are getting easier and easier to use. Having worked with you and my last organization, I think that development is happening faster. I think this iterative approach, and nobody can stop the train in an organization. You can't have the perfect solution. I think that has also enabled us to move a lot faster, but that comes with better planning so you can scale appropriately, right? And you've heard me say this. The last point I'll make is I don't like throwaway work. I don't want to do workarounds that somebody works on for 4 months and then it all goes away and have to redo it. It demotivates teams. It costs organizations money. I think now with the tools we have, we can get to market so much faster that we have to do better planning to say, how do we go step by step by step to never throw something away and keep scaling?
So I love the insights idea. I think I remember the days of building dashboards, whether it's Google Analytics or many of the other ones where let's get as much data as we can on the screen, or let's look at, these scenarios, or these subsets and everything else. At the end of the day, yes, you need good data. Yes, you need to make sure you're not misrepresenting who your customer is. But what is the actual takeaway, right? What is the insight? And what do you do with that insight? Because just having a bunch of cool insights and then, our customers only shop after 8 p.m. If you're not going to change anything based on that, then that was a useless insight too.
Right.
No, you and I've talked about silos before. I think you nailed the two sides of it. I think it's the messaging has to be the same because, as you said, the customer doesn't think of it as on this channel I got this message, on this channel I got this message. What they're saying is, wait a minute, you guys have inconsistent messaging, right? I'm getting different information from the people when I call versus different information in my email versus information on your website. There's a lack of trust being developed. But I think aligning and communicating, I've mentioned the example, I think, before on either another podcast or talking with you earlier, where I was working on a project and I asked the question, have you guys talked to your sales team about what you're going to do on the website? I'm like, well, why does that matter? They don't use the website. And I was in a bit of shock because why would the sales team not care about the website, even though they're doing direct messaging and direct calls or whatever else?
Yeah, sorry, go ahead.
No, go ahead.
That's a great point. I fundamentally believe that marketing is there to serve a sales organization, right? And in today's world, users come prepared. They go to your website, they research, and you have a quick opportunity to capture them and get them down the funnel to talk to those sales folks, right? And from a digital marketing perspective, you're there to tease the user, right? You're not there to just give them and be verbose and give them everything. But I think you're right. I think there's really two tracks. If we distill this down to the simplest form, there's the technology track where you build the platforms, you build the system and the infrastructure to get to market faster, to scale, all the things we know about. And then in parallel, you have to build a coalition. You have to bring people to the table. You have to get them talking to each other. It's not hard. It just takes work. It takes some time. And when you do that, all of a sudden you've built the iceberg under the water, right? As I like to say, this big structure that works and can scale. And then all of a sudden, after a couple of months of working with folks, take some time, they get to use it. And then everything accelerates. But if you don't do those two tracks in parallel, you're going to have a problem.
Yeah, and I'll take it one step further. When you're building this, I think technology is something that you shouldn't be noticing, but you should be using. So to me, when I think of technology, I think of the rails. You don't usually look down there and make sure all the rails are in place. You can assume they're there. And they should be getting you from point A to point B. When you and I first started working on a Veracode project, I said we need to help technology get out of the way of content creators. Because when technology slows you down, when you cannot launch a landing page or you cannot quickly alter the look that matches a particular messaging that you're trying to do within the norms, right? Within the norms that you need, within the standards that you need within your company, your branding, your styling, whatever you want to call it. But you still need the ability to quickly, not slow down. You shouldn't have a technology process that you have to put in a request and wait a week to have a new landing page or so on and so forth.
I call that minutia. It's all the electronic minutia, all the electronic minutia you need to do before you can actually do your job.
So we're going to brand that term. We'll copyright it as Scott's term, minutia. I think we'll petition Webster's to add it in 25 edition. I like it. Minutia. So don't let minutia get in the way. Break down the silos. Communicate. Make sure your message is clear. And I think make sure you're using the same tools, right? Obviously, there's some very specific tools, but I think at the end of the day, connecting the tools like your website and your Salesforce tool, or whatever tool you use for your CRM and whatever you use for your email messaging, that there has to be some kind of unification. So you end up with a clearer picture of who the customer is, and that you can understand the journey they've been to before they got to you. When you're dealing right now, you're working on internal projects mostly with your work.
Yeah, yep. We're actually rebuilding to some extent where I'm now at SS&C, and we're having great success. So mostly internal prep. Yeah.
So how do you get people convinced to align on both the message, the technology use, and like making sure that they don't go into their own little corners and pretend the other ones don't exist?
Yeah, that's a. I think you have to go in with. So you've heard me say this. You have to be sincere. Everything I talk about this all the time. If there's one word I could use in running teams and working with folks, it's sincerity. In other words, you're not going there to get something for yourself. You're going there to be sincere and work with people and understand their challenges. Everything you do, you want to listen to them. You want to be sincere in that. You want to be sincere in how you provide this information back to leadership. You always tell the truth about, don't try to sugarcoat. Don't try to, find the numbers that support your argument. Find the numbers that are the actual truth, right? The data. So I use that word as being sincere. So I think when you go out to work with folks who have a lot on their plate, they're already overwhelmed. Everybody's under-resourced these days. You have to go in understanding that I'm going to present this as a solution. I'm here to solve a problem for you. But first, you have to understand their problems. You have to understand their needs. What are they trying to accomplish? And this is what I talk about when I say build a coalition. It's not about just setting up a meeting and getting people to listen. It's truly meeting with them and saying, what are your goals? What are you trying to do? Let me understand this so we can figure out how we can work for you and support you. Because that's really what we are. We're a service organization. And we want to be a center of excellence. And the goal is to get folks to trust us so much with the data that we provide and the insights that work for them that they come running to us, right? That they're proactively coming to us. To do that, you have to build that trust through being sincere with them and really wanting to solve their problems. So first, it's understanding their problems. Two, it's showing them some value, right? What can you provide that the organization that they can't get by themselves? And if you make the process too onerous, as we talked about, if the technology for technology's sake is too onerous, they're not going to want to work with it, right? Let me give you an example. Sales and marketing, age-old problem in every company. You have standards, you have templates that are on brand, PowerPoints, whatever. How many folks work in an organization where the sales folks go out and build their own decks, each person every time for a presentation, right? Kind of table stakes at this point. Why? Why do they do that? Why can't we get a better solution in front of them? For example, I always say, why do they need these decks right away? Why aren't they referring folks to a website? Shouldn't the website give so much great summary information and talk about the differentiators and the value add of your organization that the sales folks want to say, you know what you should go to, Serge? You should go to www.ssctech.com/product, and you'll see all the intro there. And then that lines up with after they convert, right? Whatever, after they met them at the event, whatever it is, they go to that website, and it instantly then leads to the next step of that in-person meeting where that deck builds on what was on the website, right? But that takes strategic planning, messaging, content strategies, right? You have to think about it, as I said, channelless. It's one track that you think of the user. You don't think of them as, this is a sales call, this is an event, this is a website. No. What does it look like from a journey for the user when they go anywhere? How does it work synergistically?
So you're talking about the synergy. I think that's a great thought. Obviously, then you need to make sure that the sales team gives you input and they have an ability to, let's say they're going to go to an event in Toronto, right? Just up the road from you guys there. Then they want to make sure that they have the resources translated to Canadian, in meters or whatever else, whatever the nomenclature. And they don't want to have to jump through the hoops of going through this. So it has to be easy enough for them to have that landing page. And maybe even instead of saying, go to this/this, here, scan this QR code, go here. I do think some salespeople struggle with loss of control when they can't, be exactly precise in the message. And some of them may be a little worried that they're not going to get that lead back that's going to go into the main pile, or that people are going to get lost. So yeah, you said something very powerful as far as trust. So if the marketing team and the sales team have trust with each other, and the marketing resources support the sales team, then they shouldn't have to reinvent the wheel, and it speeds them up in their process. It makes the messaging overall broader and cleaner at the same time.
You bring up a point there about the trust. So this is really interesting, and this is where we come back to these coalitions and how do you do that? In every organization I've been in, every time I've reached out and gotten to introduce myself when I've started an organization, I start calling salespeople right away. And the first thing I hear is, we don't get a lot of folks from marketing calling us. People don't want to listen to us. We know the voice of the customer, and we're trying to tell the marketing organization, this is the needs, or this is what folks care about. So not only can we build better messaging, but we can build a technology stack to help support it. And most tell me that they don't hear enough from marketing and that there's not that partnership. And I would say that to have those sales enablement tools, to have those marketing tools, to leverage the tech stack, you've heard me say this. It's like Legos. I love the Lego analogy. Imagine you came home with your family, you bought a box of Legos, you opened it up, and there were no Legos in it. And you had to then cast and build your own system and come up with your own colors on the fly to what to build. That's basically what we do in service organizations, right? To some extent. Instead, what if you could work with the sales folks ahead of time? Sales, growth marketers, for example, product marketing, you had all these folks aligned on the message before you started building the solutions for a campaign or for your tech stack. And then you had all the 5-word headline written, the 2-sentence headline written, the 30-page document written, the designs, the marketing it. You had all those Lego blocks built. So when you initiate the campaign, everything's signed off on, everything's been spell checked. There are no questions. There's no changing 2 days before something launches. Think how much faster that enables folks and the trust it builds because you've heard them and you've been listened to and you took their requirements into account, right? That is something that can happen rather quickly if you bring folks to the table together. And then in parallel, all the things you learn from a campaign like that, you start to understand, okay, this is the technology stack we need to support this, right? How do you build a technology stack or even code a website when you're building everything on the fly proactively? Reactively, excuse me.
So I throw in customer service people in part of that conversation, especially if you have an active
100%.
product, because they're the ones who get the complaints, right? I think that's we don't want to forget them as well. No, I mean, I think
True.
you're right. And I think, as a technology partner, I sometimes play the role of mediator between the departments because, well, they didn't ask my opinion when they launched it. I know at least 3 different organizations that I worked with where one department got so mad they built their own separate website. And then
we never have that happen in companies.
Yeah, no. And then you have to reconcile, right? And I think that this is very interesting. So I'm curious, do you think when we're dealing with more complex relationships with B2B as opposed to B2C, right? B2C, the idea of a customer profile is a little simpler. We kind of know who the end customer is. When we're dealing with B2B, is there more that has to be thought through because we're now thinking about, hey, who are they serving? Is there more that's involved in that negotiation of layers? Is there more technology needed, or is it more understanding that's needed, more data that's needed? What is missing when we go to B2B world?
Well, it depends on the size of the organization and if it's a heavily matrixed organization or not. For example, I work in a company that's a much larger company now, SS&C, than my previous company, which operated like a 15-year startup, right? So I think what we need to be thinking about is again, back to understanding the user, right? First of all, let me say we're here to talk technology in some ways, but you see how that we always kind of separate the technology, right? Because the technology, we can solve the problem if we understand the needs. I think number one is going back to what are the stressors and what are the needs of each of your internal customers? Everybody's under pressure in different ways. They all have they're being judged on different goals. They have different projects that are prioritized over maybe yours. So if you call them and say, hey, we want to solve this problem for you, and a lot of users might be saying, look, I've got 6 projects on my plate. They're all high priority. I don't have time to work with you, right? So how can you convince somebody through showing them technology, showing them your solutions, your insights, that you can make their life easier? That's number one. I always come back to that. Because think about when your phone rings. When somebody calls you and wants something, are you thinking, oh, God, I got another thing on my plate? Or are you thinking, wow, this person can really help me, right? How do you want that positioned? So that's number one. And I think that you have to build relationships ongoing, right? You have to understand where the technology works, where it doesn't. And I think that you have to be flexible. Can you build a system with your technology that is flexible and scalable long term? It's great and it's simple to say we're all going to be on the same platform. We're all going to follow the same rules. That's great. Does that ever really work in practice? No, you have to, it's the 80-20 rule. Get 80% of the way there and then carve out the exceptions for unique cases.
So, I'm always wondering, you mentioned about the idea of not adding more people's plate, but solving problems. One of the common things that are into it, and we deal with clients and we deal with people who, when they implement something new, like a tool integration, we do try to position it as, hey, this is going to save you time. But there's an inevitable, especially with folks my age and older, right? I got to learn a new tool. I got to learn how to do things differently. I've done it the same way for the last, we won't say how many years. I'll still rather use a spreadsheet than some of the other data stuff because I'm comfortable with spreadsheets, but there's definitely more modern things to do. You and I talked earlier about the idea of Google searches. Our generation is more comfortable with Google search as opposed to using, a GPT type system to get data. How do you find that balance between saying, okay, guys, we need to work together on these tools. They're here to make your life easier, but you still need to learn and use it correctly. Is that your job, or is that more of a job of an external partner who does the training, or somebody even leadership? How does that work?
I think it's everybody's job. I think, again, building consensus. You can't put process in for process sake, right? If something doesn't work, you have to be willing to adjust to it. So look, we're actually going through this right now. I would handle it a couple of ways. I would say that you find the power users who are willing to adopt and get success with them, because there's, healthy competition is good, right? So if some folks are doing really well with your new solution and they're seeing results, those folks who maybe were resistant are going to say, wait, what's going on over here with Serge? He's doing really well with this. I want that, right? So you
Right.
want to lead people, right? You don't want to push people all the time. Then you want to build internal guidelines, right? And swim lanes about how we do things. For example, from a technology perspective, how do, age old one, how do you submit requests, right? Through an operation system. Everybody, some people send them through Slack, some people send them through email. Hardly anybody wants to use Workfront or Jira or whatever it is. Well, no, you have to have policies that say this is the way we submit. You don't get to go and use, well, it's probably not around anymore. I'm older, but you have to use Outlook. That's our email system. You don't get to use Gmail or your old 10, 20-year-old version of Lotus Notes. This is our standard. Well, this is our standard. So you attack it from multiple angles is what I'm saying, right? And I also think something that we have not talked about before, and that I've really learned over the past few years, is that working with you guys at Code Engine Studio and doing some of this work, is that when you implement some of this technology or try to approach it and gather requirements, it almost acts, it's the catalyst that brings people together if you handle it right. And this is where my perception is flipped. Years ago when I was in technology, I was like, oh, it's just technology. Now I view it as my role is not to help with technology or digital. My role is to be the connective tissue, to bring all these different teams together. Because at the end of the workflow, on web, for example, we can see all the touch points and the inputs before and answer the questions that folks may have not thought of, right? You did the same thing when you guys worked with me. And it was like, oh, if we're going to rebuild this infrastructure on Drupal, for example, that let me spin up a project and bring all these folks to the table and ask them all the right questions. And then they felt they had a voice, their requirements were being heard, and then they embraced that technology more. That's the other part. Right back to what I said. Giving folks a voice and a seat at the table gets them on board. If you don't do that and you just say we're building this, people are going to be resistant. And it's not fair to folks to not listen to them.
The other piece, I think, I have loved the change in the technology, and I think you said something about Legos. Particularly we look at CMS systems or DXP systems or stuff like that. We've evolved so much in those, and this whole idea of composable architecture has made life so much simpler because you don't have to build consensus. Because guess what? I like my images on the right. You like your images on the left. Maybe, we have a client that's working on a project for Japan and they want to do fonts differently, whatever, right? Whatever the guidelines, but if you can improve your standards and give them the tools that these are the Legos we use. Now, you want to align your Legos differently? Look, as a kid, I never built my Legos the same way twice. But I still came up with something at the end of it, and it was still something fun, and usually with wheels that drove somewhere, or, or you had use your imagination. But I think this idea of giving people the tools, and then I've learned from a lot of customers who say, well, you guys gave us this tool and we started using it in the way it wasn't intended, but it's really cool. Can we actually implement a better solution for this? Oh, wow, what a good idea. All right, let's try that. So I think that there's an ongoing dialogue and there's an evolution. One thing you said, when you the dream world where you say, hey, everybody will use the same system and everything's going to be perfect. Well, the systems change, right? We remember Marketplace, I'd say 2018. Who was at the top of the marketplace? They're not the same companies top of the marketplace now in various technology stacks, right? There's players out that don't exist anymore. There's players who were niche players who've grown and have provided much better solutions now, right? So I think there's room to grow, and I think it does come down to culture of when you have the trust and when people feel they have a voice, they're more open to, hey, I heard about this new AI tool. Can we try to use it in our marketing?
Yeah.
As opposed to, nope, this is the way I'm going to do it, right? And not being willing to change. So do you see people bring ideas to you when you kind of empower them?
Oh, absolutely. I view this as kind of the self-service model. Look, my job is to make my job obsolete, right? I mean, that's my job. I want to grow my team. I want to help. Hopefully, I can help them, mentor them, and I want to solve my customers' problems so the users can get their needs met. It's really that simple, right? And when you look at this, everything comes back to, you just mentioned technology changes. This is why we go back to, what is the strategy? That strategy and the requirements we have should work no matter what you do. You could remove this platform, add another platform. The platforms can change over time. If you have a plan and a strategy, you can apply any technology to it. Now, over time, you adjust that strategy for new capabilities. So, for example, I have a lot of customers now. We've planted seeds around AI. I've given some demos around some cool little things I've seen. And now they're coming to us and saying, hey, could we do this? Could we do that? Yeah, I'd love to, right? And you follow a process back to your guidelines and swim lanes. You build a process to intake that information, right? You build a process to approve it, right? You have to go through compliance and legal depending on the solution. But if you get ahead of that and you think these things through before you reach out to the customer, you have all their questions answered ahead of time, right? So you can tell them what can be done and what can't be. I think the worst is when you commit to a customer and say, we're going to solve a problem, and you never get back to them, or you just leave them hanging for a year because you're too busy checking boxes.
They're no longer going to be your customer at some point. They're going to look for external solutions.
Yeah, and I wouldn't you? I would.
Yeah, if I feel ignored, yeah, absolutely. Let me ask you this: you've been in business quite a few years and worked in different companies. We now are dealing with the millennials, and I'm assuming you have some Gen Zs who are entering workforce around you. Has there been a change in their approach to the way they collaborate and the way they use technology compared to Gen X and Boomers and whoever else? And has that made your job easier, harder, or just different to have to keep evolving the strategy and the perhaps even messaging?
That's a really interesting question. I've had the luxury of working. Well, I worked in healthcare for a long time, which I always say is like 10 years behind it, because their primary business is healthcare, not technology. Then I moved into technology companies. I would say that I would say folks probably my age and older sometimes have had a trouble shifting to the digital marketing side when they're specifically sales driven. Because, there's a great book I read once, What Got You Here Won't Get You There. Incredible book about business training. I think the gentleman trained or
Marshall,
mentored.
Yeah,
top CEOs. And, when you're extremely successful or even moderately successful, you don't want to change because you think this is what works for me, right? But what I have seen in technology companies is it doesn't really matter how old you are. It doesn't really matter what background you come from. Folks are there because they're excited. Now, what I would say has had the bigger impact is remote working. Not being able to get into a room with folks and whiteboard and break bread with them and just get to know folks. I noticed that folks entering the workforce who are, maybe it's their first corporate job, have a harder time with, reading facial expressions or the dynamics around a table of getting social cues and just how to talk when there's 10 people on a call. So, and I'm not sure that's an age thing as much as it is. It's just, you're not used to it. That's been a challenge.
So Is technology a help or a hindrance in that challenge where people are not used to the, how should we put it, old school technology requirement?
It's both. To be honest, I know that's right. Everything is, it depends. It depends on the situation in the group, but the fact that we can be anywhere in the world and be working together, like, in 5 minutes, hop on a call and sort something out is incredible. And not worry about somebody having to commute 2 hours. That's great. But I would say that it's also a hindrance in that, once a month minimum, you need to be in a room with folks. You need to be planning. I do a lot of strategy work and whiteboarding. So I was just in New York recently. I live right outside the Boston area. I was in New York and I called a couple of colleagues to come up to New York just so we could sit and whiteboard for 2 days. And what we accomplished in 2 days, locked in a room, was something we would have taken months to do remotely. So I think it depends on what your goal is in understanding where it fits.
Yeah, I think it does come down to power of relationships, especially when you don't have that depth of relationship and the person is newer on the team and so on and so forth. By the way, the irony is you mentioned the book, what got you here won't get you there. I don't know if you can see it. The webcast I'm listening to is interviewing Marshall Goldsmith, the author of that book. And I'm like, and he mentions that book and talked about how he got to that book. And I was like, this is hilarious that we're listening, impacting by the same thing. So
that's funny.
Well, that brings me to kind of a side question here. Where are you on this whole, when it comes to content not being lost in the ocean of generation of content? We talk about, the sheer volume of what is being generated right now and the messaging that's out there. Any topic you look at, thousands of articles generated in the last 2 years, right? How do you, in marketing, whether it's using technology, and obviously I have no doubt you guys are using some kind of GPT models to help you with content, and you have AI tools you use for different things, image generation, who knows? But how do you compete against the volume and stand out in that volume?
This it always comes back to the same thing. The user does not care about your company. They care about getting their needs met. It is that simple. I have a diagram I built of an optimal web page as an example for folks that I've shared in every company I've worked in for the last 10 years. And it starts with, what is the user's need? Sometimes you have to help define that for them at the beginning, let's say, of a web page, or a journey, right? And then you tell them, and pick their top three. Humans, I don't know if you've ever seen, there's a great TED talk on this. People think in threes, 3 bullet lists. They frame things as threes. It's a great way to get people to think or to digest. So you start with the user need, give them their top three, address that need, speak to that need, how you address that need, why you're better than your competition, and then give them an off ramp to connect with you. That's it. From a top of funnel perspective, for example, if you're addressing your user need, I think you've hit the jackpot. If you're talking about yourself and you as a company, and we synergize our solutions, that gobbledygook means nothing, right? Our solution, emailing reimagined. Well, that means nothing. It doesn't tell the user anything. If you're specific and explicit in short terms, that frames something for a user to digest, and then you move them to the next step and the next step. None of us have time to look at crafty jargon words. So from a content strategy perspective, it's about addressing the user needs, which ties us back to the beginning of the discussion. That means you have to have spoken to the sales teams, the customer service teams. You have to understand what they're hearing from customers, and you need that circle, right? I almost said circle of trust, right? But you have that circle feedback loop in the company of where you're constantly optimizing, and then you get to apply the technology and optimize the technology because you've learned that information. All right, what's a better UX design for this web page? What's a better tool set for the internal site managers to optimize? That's what we worked with you guys on, building this really efficient, optimized system where you had to do less coding, less molding the Lego blocks, and instead wielding the blocks and building whatever they wanted, enabling those folks internally, right? So it all ties together, right? We're talking about a lot of topics, but all of these things are inseparable to me. I'm half Italian. I talk with my hands.
That's okay. I do believe, while it sounds like we're talking about a lot of topics, I think they all are essentially one topic: is how do we get better, right? I think how do we get better as organizational units, whether it's empowering with technology, whether it's empowering better communication. Look, can you go back and work without Slack or Slack equivalent today? Of course not. I mean, we used to. I mean, I remember Office Space was the only way to communicate with people was email. Is Slack all wonderful? No, it's not. It's annoying sometimes when people are pinging you in the middle of something else. But I think it's every little piece that we put together, whether it's a system or a design system or a process, how to submit requests, they all work together. Of can you work towards that vision, your goal, your strategy? And then you said something earlier part of our call that is very much a power word for me, which is iterative. Look, we have to continue to ask a question. Yes, it worked last month. Yes, that group of audience hit it, but we are shifting to a different niche, or it's a generational difference, or we happen to have an outlier that we caught and we caught all those fish. We need to evolve because the second time it's not working. And I think as long as the communication is there and the technology does not slow you down, but enhances your processes, I think then you're moving forward. You're getting better.
I would totally agree. And I've said it earlier in the call, but I think if you look at these two tracks, if you want to be successful, as a team, as a player, coach, player, it doesn't matter what your role is, right? There's an advantage to having a background like I have where I grew up in technology, right? And I love it. It's the coolest thing. And what I learned was when I got into a leadership role, letting go of some of that technology, trusting other folks, and then learning how to strategize and understand what's needed to apply the technology to. If you can figure out both those tracks and focus on them, right? And if you have the energy and the will, because, I love doing this. I love trying to solve a problem. There's nothing more frustrating to me than when I can't solve my customer's problem. It drives me insane. I stay up at night thinking about it, right? And especially when the technology gets in the way because we haven't planned properly, right? So to me, if you're doing both, if you're building that technology set, you're building that box, the Lego systems, whether it's a unified design system for web components, whether it's, email systems, or whether it's just, operational guidelines and where folks go to one document repository, right? So they don't have to go to 20, which everybody deals with. The simplest things can solve people's problems, but you always have to be thinking, you always have to be talking to users. What's your problem? What's working? What's not? That is paramount.
Yeah, it's technology for technology's sake doesn't work. Technology connects us, empowers us, but people are the ones who matter, and then we need to have them aligned the same way. We often talk about, rowing the boat together, right? That one guy, if he starts rowing the other direction, all of a sudden the boat starts going more in a circle.
That's one of the things I loved. Sorry to interrupt, but one of the things I loved about working with your company was, your folks are very technical, but when I got on the call, all they did was ask me questions, right? They wanted to know our business. They wanted to know what our challenges were. And every step of the way, the team would constantly say, look, I get it. We've talked through this. This is what you'd like to do. But what if we did this? Would this solve it better? And then it was just great because they were thinking about the issue. They weren't thinking about the technology. They're thinking about solving the problem in the best way possible. And that's why we work so efficiently.
Yeah. Ultimately, that's the goal for every customer, right? You're trying to solve the problem of your customer. We try to solve the problem of our customer. And if we can make it one step easier for everybody to do their life, to do their work, to do their non-work stuff, I think that's a happier day for all of us.
100%.
Scott, thank you very much for being on our webcast. We look forward to possibly connecting with you again in the future to talk about some other things. But for everybody else, please tune in again. More episodes are coming soon with wonderful guests just like Scott. Thank you.